Welcome to the settlement. I'm Fen, and this is the Dark Bestiary Chapter 8, The Crimson Crocodile. This is an ongoing series where we take a deep dive into each of the bosses in the game Kingdom Death Monster, covering such things as real-world inspirations, in-game lore, thematics, mechanics, AI and hit location, and looking at the resources to give you a full picture of the monster as full as I can manage, and also kind of just let you see how the monster is attacking you, what angles it's coming at, so you can figure out the strategies that are going to help you take one of these down, and then again and again and again. Before we get into that though, this is a fairly special video. I've talked in the past about how I wanted to have these videos edited because I'm not an editor, I don't have the skills, I don't really have the time either, so I end up not doing a great job on it. So this particular video is being edited by a professional, and this is kind of a proof of concept. It's not cheap to hire someone to do this kind of work. My Kingdom Death videos barely make anything on ad revenue anyway, so this video is definitely going to be a loss. But I wanted to show what these videos could be if I could have someone professionally editing everything and putting it all together at the back end, so I can concentrate more on the research and the talking and the writing, and knowing that somebody else is going to handle the rest. So first of all, very big thank you to the editor for this video, much appreciated. And secondly, if you like this, if you like how this has been edited together, you can help have more of these being made. If you go to the link in the description to my Patreon, you'll now find there's 3 new tiers, and these are specifically to do with being able to afford having an editor for these videos. They are called the Zoologist, the Archivist, and the Dark Archivist. The concept there is they're gradually increasing amounts, and with enough support in there, I'll be able to do 1 video a month edited, around about between 15 and 20 people at the first tier. If we get double that, then I could have 2 videos edited. There are 3 series I want to do, and I'd love to also just do recorded content, but that needs to be very heavily edited, and I'd like to even go as far as having the smaller reviews edited as well to clean it all up. So that's how you can pop on there and say, hey, I want this. Also put some money towards replacing my PC, because cards on the table, it is struggling to run the simulator now. Just setting this up took me a couple of hours because of some issues since the latest update, but my computer is very old at this point anyway. So that's it. Like I say, hope you enjoy this one, and if you want more, those 3 tiers are where you can support. As always, if you can't afford that, it's very understandable, and any support you can give, comments, likes, sharing, support via the Patreon or Ko-fi, that's all greatly appreciated. But yeah, this is a project I'd really like to do, and if there is enough support, I'll even go back and redo all of the previous chapters of the Dark Bestiary from scratch and have them re-edited. So, with all of that said, it's time for us to get into looking at this, starting with Part 1, Real-World Influences and the Lore. Before we get any further, it's my favourite Kingdom Death boss monster by a long shot. It's not even close how much I really love everything about this. When I was growing up, I interned in the National Museum of Wales in the zoology department. Mostly dealt with insects, but I also got to spend some time with people who were experts in other things, and reptiles, I've always really loved them. And crocodiles in particular are kind of amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the real world influence behind this beauty, and then we'll get into all of its specific sort of lore elements within the world, because there's not a massive amount of lore about the Crimson Crocodile. It's not a linchpin monster to the setting in the way that the White Lions are. It just kind of exists within the environment, a bit more like how the Screaming Antelope does, or Spidiculus and similar. That doesn't mean it's not super interesting. So, very first thing I did when I wanted to really dig into how the Crimson Crocodile was designed is I went to the real-world influences, which I know is a part of the design process for all of the Kingdom Death monsters. You can see parts of behaviours of our world monsters in all of these, and expressed through mechanics and thematics. Obviously it's a crocodile, but we can actually get a little bit more accurate than that. We know that based on the name of the card, 21,000 Newton bite, Crimson Crocodiles have that level of bite force. So we can get into nature, and while Newton bite force isn't exactly the ideal way to cover that kind of bite strength, we do have the numbers for it. PSI is often used instead, but we have what we have. So if we go through the animal kingdom, we can find a crocodile with not quite this amount of bite force, but close, and it's actually the animal with the strongest measured bite force that we've ever been able to record. That particular species is the saltwater crocodile, which is, well, it's one heck of an animal. It is located in and around the region from India all the way down to sort of the north coast of Australia, so that kind of Indo-Pacific sort of region, and they are found in all types of water, be that fresh, brackish, or even saltwater. They're a really impressive and terrifying thing. Saltwater crocodiles are absolutely an apex predator, and even more than that, they're an apex predator that actively hunts. Things like sharks may bite people, but that tends to be an accident. The shark isn't specifically hunting for a person, it's more that they see the opportunity, or the person on a surfboard, say, looks like a seal, which is one of the shark's preferred sort of hunting targets. Unlike that, though, saltwater crocodiles are not just hunting people, they're capable of long-term planning and organisation and cooperation. For example, in Ballarat Zoo in Australia, over a period of 6 months, a crocodile conditioned one of the zookeepers during feeding time. What happened is, when that zookeeper was feeding, the crocodile came a little bit closer each time, just a tiny amount, and as it moved closer and closer and closer each feeding time, so the zookeeper normalised what was going on and didn't realise this crocodile, this saltwater crocodile, was getting so close. And then it bit him, and bit his leg, and that's when they had a big kind of moment of, oh boy, we need to be really careful. This crocodile didn't just take advantage of an opportunity, it engineered the situation. It tricked him into getting used to it being closer and closer. Also in Australia, if you're out around near water, camping or whatever, you have to be really careful. You're advised to not ever, if you go near the water edge, but if you have to, make sure that you vary where you're going, because generally if you, say, are camping and near a river and there are saltwater crocodiles in the area, the first time you go and use the river, nothing will happen. The second time, nothing will happen, but the crocodile, if there is one around, will have clocked that you've returned to the same spot, and the third time you go there, it's gonna get you. These are really terrifyingly smart in a way that we don't fully understand and cover as a whole bunch of fascinating things. They have firearms resistance, not just with their scaly scoots, but also they have bone plates, osteoderms, bone armor in and around various places. They are big, very big. Largest recorded one was 6.17 meters. Anecdotally, some people say they've seen them going up to 7 meters, but regardless, 6 meters, and it was over 1,000 kilograms in weight. It's huge. To get back to the bite force, they have a 16,414 measured Newton measured bite force. That's 10 times higher than a lion. The animals that we believe exceed this are great white sharks at about 18,000 newtons, and orcas, which, if I remember correctly, are around 80,000 to 85,000 newtons. They have a massively powerful bite. But what that really, we're talking ridiculous numbers, because just a human is about 300 to 400 newtons. So you can see how powerful the jaws are on these crocodiles. But on top of that, there's a bunch of other uniquely unusual things when you come to these. Their jaws can snap down very hard, but they are, because they have a scissor-style muscle, they're very, very weak at opening, which is why you'll see alligator wrestling or crocodile wrestling. In fact, just putting some duct tape around the snout of a crocodile can hold its jaw in place. So they are terrifying on the snap, but if their jaws are already closed, they can be held shut with very little force comparatively. They have an eyesight that's not much better than a human's, like equivalency, but they're located slightly forward facing and slightly to the side, giving them a 260 degree arc of vision. And usually these crocodiles will sit in murky water with just their eyes and their snout poking out of the top. Now, one of the things that's really cool about the saltwater crocodile is for a long time we didn't understand how they could survive in salty water. The turtles and seabirds, they cry out salt through their glands, their tear glands. Sharks have salt glands around near their posterior that they excrete the salt that way. Essentially, if you need to be able to handle a lot of salt, especially if you're not in it all the time. We didn't know how it worked with crocodiles. Turns out their salt glands are on their tongue, and they will excrete the salt out there and then blow it out through their nostrils out the top. We didn't learn that for a long time because messing around inside crocodiles' mouths is not something, it's pretty dangerous. Speaking of dangerous, other things, generally crocodiles cause around 1,000 fatalities a year, and the saltwater crocodile and the Nile crocodile make up most of that. That's much higher than sharks, and the truth is, it's suspected that maybe a higher number because many of the attacks occur in places without reporting, more sort of isolated places. They're able to consistently grow their teeth throughout their lifespan. They go through around 3,000 teeth. And they're also found to be very social. They look after their young. They protect their eggs. They even seem to talk with each other. As mentioned, they've demonstrated lots of forms of planning, but also they'll collaborate. Like one crocodile will rush and scare a prey into a space where others are already waiting in order to ambush. And they can even learn and have preferences. One study I learned about, which I thought was really fun, was they took a bunch of crocodiles and in the shell, they suffused it with strawberry flavour. So while growing in the shell, they had this strawberry flavouring. Once they hatched out, those little baby crocodiles showed a preference for strawberry flavoured meat. You can show them normal meat and strawberry flavoured meat, they go for the strawberry. And they even tried sort of like orange and other sort of flavours, and still those crocodiles preferred the strawberry flavoured meat. So they are learning and developing preferences very early on. Even their death rolls are kind of learnt that they have it right from the start, and they learn how to use it very effectively very quickly. So that's real world crocodiles. That's the saltwater crocodile. How does the crimson crocodile shape up? Well, as you can see, first of all, much bigger bite. Considering the size of the crimson crocodile, I think that's actually quite reasonable. A while ago I sort of tried to estimate how big a crimson crocodile would be, and the best we can do is essentially measuring a miniature and then measuring the length of the crocodile from snout to tail. I figured out you have to run down like the spine and the curvature of this model. If we assume a survivor like Zachary is around 6 foot tall, then we can estimate that the crimson crocodile is about 36 foot, and in centimetres that's 1,097 centimetres in length. Over 10 metres, which is bigger than the saltwater crocodiles, about 30% bigger, at least 40%, and it would weigh between 1,500 and 2,000 kilograms. The bite's pretty reasonable for its size, and I kind of just love all of these little features. Now I've talked about real world crocodiles. I'll get a little bit into the crimson crocodile itself. We have first of all these feet. The leg shape is similar to real crocodiles, but there's no webbing on the back foot at all, which crocodiles, they have webbed back toes. Additionally, there's no scoots along the spine. Scoots are elongated scales, and you'll see crocodiles have a double ridge of them down the back of their tail, which they use it helps with the water, just like swimming through it. Their tail is the predominant way that they propel themselves when underwater. We can also see there's very little scaling, which does suggest that quite possibly the crimson crocodile is lacking one of the benefits that a saltwater crocodile has, which is saltwater crocodiles, on their scoots they have these nodes of feeling sensors, and they are able, when in the water, to feel everything around them at a fairly good distance. I'm not sure if these little nodes on here, these little nodules, would be a similar equivalent, but this definitely isn't really a scaled monster when we look at the sculpt. It has a few, you can see like on the head there's definitely some scaling there, but then when we get to the rest of it, this seems a lot sort of physically softer. And the tail is very different. This is a fan-like tail, which is more the kind of thing we'd see on, say, guppies or fighting fish and similar. It's got 12 eyes, 6 on either side, and these tiny, you see it, tiny little ear here, and a nub of one around here. This is, instead of having these scoots and these nodes for sensing, it has a lot more eyes, and we know that the Crimson Crocodile can actually replace lost eyes from other creatures. We'll see a card that actually does that, but it's capable of popping an eye out from someone and putting it into a empty socket. Another really interesting part that obviously deviates from normal crocodiles is this spine, this finger spine. The crocodile has a bunch of faces, stone faces, from the floor held in the spine. You can see a mouth there, and then up the back here, then far more prominently obvious. I think that underneath here there isn't really any kind of protective coating, and so Crimson Crocodiles protect the area by scooping up stones, founding stones, faces, and holding them in place, which is pretty cool and interesting. It certainly gives kind of a evolutionary adaptation for the fingers. Like because they've got them, they can do other things, and we have the same down here. I'm not completely certain. I'll see if we can figure out during this video. I don't know if these hands are decorative or if they're able to like open in any way. That is something I'm still not clear on. This is such a fascinating creature. It's got a great design. It's goofy. It's kind of weird and unsettling and scary and odd. I absolutely love my Crimson Crocodile. There's a photo of it. She's called Crunk. She's terrible. She's a great mischief maker, and I love her. The last thing to kind of talk about before we get on is just the environment in which I think these Crimson Crocodiles mostly exist. So we have every Showdown this, pop you over there, this blood pool. Crimson Crocodiles clearly don't need water as much as other crocodiles. There's not really very much water in the Water Kingdom Depth, but there's a fair amount of blood around. We've seen blood lakes, blood rivers. I reckon that these Crimson Crocodiles predominantly live in and around the edge of not just these blood pools, but kind of areas with a lot of blood pools, kind of a blood swamp. And I do think that's sort of evidenced somewhat. We see it in Brave's story. So if you come over here, this is Brave from the Killennium Butcher. So Brave, he wishes to be Brave, a child who woke a monster deep in the lake. He foolishly led it back to his settlement. In the calamitous battle, the elders protected the youth to their dying breath, until only the child and the mortally wounded monster remained. The child cradled its bloodied snout, gazing into its clouding eyes. He forgave the creature and set off. I'm pretty confident that's a Crimson Crocodile, or if we wanted to give it its Latin name, Crocodilus sanguius. I think in that particular circumstance with Brave, it shows that kind of level of planning that the saltwater crocodiles also perform. You know, it befriended him. It could have just snapped him up as a child and eaten him, but instead it chose to play a longer game and attack Brave's settlement instead, which would be a far larger and more satisfying meal. Also, Brave is kind of an idiot, but that's pretty on form for that character. This is a really fascinating creature. So much of it's clearly inspired by saltwater crocodiles, even down to it being in blood, which is usually somewhat salty due to having electrolytes. And it also has a really cool form of defense that we'll get into when we talk about its hit locations, where it can employ blood as a protective barrier. But that brings us on now to part two. Part two, the Showdown page and hunt phase. We have up our Showdown page. We'll start with a little look at hunt layout. I guess at level 1, this is pretty standard. We've got 2 basic hunt events and 1 Crimson Crocodile specific event. That's pretty normal for a Node 1 or Node 2 monster. One of the bigger changes is when we get to Node 2, in that, first of all, we'll now have 1, 2, 3 basic hunt events and 3 Crimson Crocodile ones, so that's 50% for Crimson Crocodile. But also the actual level 2 Crocodile sat here, leaving this space free, which is really big if we want to do post-Overwhelming Darkness mining. So that is a super helpful spot. We don't see that too often. Screaming Antelope's one of the other key places where it appears. So it's absolutely fantastic. The level 3 positioning, pretty standard, reintroduces back in 2 basic hunt events with just 1 Crimson Crocodile one being added for a total maximum of 4. It's unlikely to move off into the starvation space. Crimson Crocodile doesn't move too much, be unusual. Onto the instinct. Some instincts, like the White Lions, are pretty weak. They're just essentially trying to improve the chances of targeting. This here from Fingerstrum isn't. Because of the way the Crimson Crocodile's set up, suffering brain damage is a big thing. So this is kind of scary. We'll get through all of this when we look at the dashboard, but the main thing to note here is the Crimson Crocodile tends to have lower toughness in these 2 levels. This is actually kind of lowish as well, but not too unusual. That means that it's likely to take damage more often, but it is more aggressive as a compensation. The Showdown setup has 2 guaranteed pieces of terrain. They're both very important. The first one is the Survivor Corpse card. That's a one-off. We'll take a look at that when we get to the Showdown board and look at position and things like that. The second one is the Blood Pool. Now, what they're both doing here is they're giving you ways to replenish insanity. The Survivor Corpse is a one-off shot, and the Blood Pool is repeated. Because of that, you generally want to congregate the fight around the middle of the board to have people in range of the Blood Pool. We'll talk more about managing your insanity to try and keep the Showdown from getting out of control a little bit later on when we look at terrain and we look at the status cards. This, on the defeat, archival, soluble and consumable gear. Obviously losing the Showdown is really bad anyway. Losing soluble and consumable gear is also quite bad, and you know, no benefits of death principle. Generally wiping against a Crimson Crocodile is potentially campaign wrecking, so bear that in mind. On the rewards, Crimson Crockery, we should have already got that from the prologue, and currently if you have a Crimson Crocodile in your campaign, I recommend that is the prologue you go for, unless you want to house rule the change talked about with the prologue in another video, which is that the prologue always gives you the Crimson Crockery. I think that is a better change for the game's health as a whole, and as a consequence I think that the White Lion prologue should give the Catarium and the Frog Dog should give the Frostcrafter. But, you know, maybe that won't ever change. Maybe the Crimson Crocodile is just the exception, but it is far more interesting. Rest of the rewards, you'll notice they're 4 basic, 5 Crimson Crocodile. Really nice. Level 2, 5 basic, 6 Crimson Crocodile, plus an irregular optic nerve. That helps make it a bow, a very good bow. At level 3, we got 5 basic, 8 Crimson Crocodile resources in the standard black lichen. And then finally a bonus, if we have Bloodletting when we defeat a level 3 plus Crocodile, then we get access to a Blood Diamond tier. We'll take a look at that resource. It's not the only way we can get one. This isn't a huge bonus, but you generally are going to have Bloodletting in every settlement because of how important it is for handling certain issues such as plague and some severe injuries. So all of this is quite nice. I especially appreciate the additional resources, which does make a fair bit of a difference. On the hunt phase itself, we have laid out all the cards as always. So left side is like fixed in their results, right side is random, R for random, top mostly positive, these are kind of neutral or they could go either way, and this bottom row is negative. So you can see here the Crimson Crocodile on the sort of fixed side of things. If we take a look, we can see two events here that are fixed negatives, 2 that are fixed positives, 2 random positives, 2 random neutrals, and this card here that I put in the middle because it's kind of very dependent on your choices. So we'll start in top left with our 2 cards here, the first one of which is Lady in the Blood Lake. You can nominate a survivor who will gain blind. Remember that if you happen to have Dried Acanthus that will cancel the blind. Then anyone with bleeding tokens will gain +1 accuracy and another bleeding. Be aware of that, but you always want bandages against the Crimson Crocodile anyway, or first aid kit. You want ways to stop bleeding getting too far out of control. And if the event revealer is not deaf, so this is independent to the story, then you can spend 1 survival to gain the Inner Lantern innovation. Inner Lantern, as you all know, gives access to Surge, very strong. You really want this. If you don't want this, you just get a random hunt event instead if you draw it later on. So there's really nothing particularly to be concerned about. Interestingly, there's this woman who rises from the Lake of Blood. Obviously, this is a reference to Arthurian legends, like most games that references kind of stuff. And in fact, Kingdom Death has a lot of Arthurian references in it anyway, like a great deal. That whole Welsh Celtic part of British folklore is very prominent in this game. Honestly, don't know who this lady is otherwise, but it is interesting and intriguing. Our other card is Crawling Finger. Survivors overtake a large severed finger inching its way up a hill. This is a finger severed from the Crimson Crocodile's spine. Interesting that they have their own kind of capability to move. It's heading towards the Crimson Crocodile. So that again makes us wonder if perhaps the crocodile has some form of decentralized nervous system where the fingers are capable of some independent action of their own, or if it's just an inbuilt instinct that these severed digits will try and return. Depending on what we've got, we'll get to choose different results. So if we don't have anything, it's 1 brain event damage, not great. Brain insanity is important for the showdown, but it is capped at 1. So even against level 3 crocodile, it's still only 1, that's nice. If the event revealer has 3+ courage, then you'll grab the finger and gain a pale finger's Crimson Crocodile resource. More resources is always good. If you have 3+ understanding, you could choose to skip the next space on the hunt board. That can be very useful. Skipping basic hunt events is always beneficial in my opinion. And then if you happen to have 3+ understanding and a pickaxe, you can go back to where the finger came from and excavate an iron instead. So depends on what you want and what the situations are. Gaining the resource I think is generally the best choices. Iron is obviously very valuable. Pale fingers less so, but still it's out of the deck, means you've already gained it, so you'll gain other things that could be more valuable. Next on our positives, we've got our positive randoms. We'll start with Salty Reeds. This has monster level brain event damage, which is not great at higher levels, and in fact against high level monsters later on I would generally move this down in positivity, because the really big positive reason it's here is for the Diamond Scab's indomitable resource. So if you no longer have need for that, then this definitely becomes a negative. Each survivor with 3+ understanding can investigate, and they do it 1 at a time. You roll the dice. 1 to 5, you gain 1 bleeding token for each hit location without armor gear. Most survivors should be fully armored by that point, although it's worth noting that naked survivors such as Crystal, Skin, or Marrowism survivors, things like that, will suffer some bleed. And in fact, it can be very bad if you have no armor on any of your locations whatsoever, so pay attention to that. Don't go hunting a Crimson Crocodile with a completely naked survivor unless they can withstand gaining 5 bleed tokens without dying. On the 6+, you gain the Diamond Scab's indomitable resource, and in the event, that gives us access to the Katars. We'll look at that during the resource section. This is the jackpot. If you don't investigate, if no one investigates, and remember it's optional, you don't have to investigate if you would bleed out from doing this, it's your choice. But if no one investigates, you get a random hunt event, which is pretty standard. Overall, you've got a lot of options with what you're doing in respect to this. It is worth the brain event damage. Definitely hitting this early on, giving yourself access to the Qatar quickly, can be transformative for a campaign. There's a lot of power in those. Then we have Leechy Springs. The survivors enter a field of thermal springs that erupt with a mass of fatty leeches. You nominate 1 survivor to investigate, and if they're bold, that is, they have gained enough courage and triggered the bold event, then they're bold. They get add 2 to the roll. On 1 to 4, it's too close, you get hit by a leech, you suffer monster level event damage to the head. Kind of scary. First thing that indicates to us is we really shouldn't use our tank to investigate this. They need their armor points. We really want our furthest backline survivor, our support or ranged attacker to interact with this, where it hurts them less if they do take the head damage because they're going to get hit less often because of positioning. On a 3 to 8, you pull out a leech that reminds you of your childhood and you gain +3 insanity. And on a 9+, you gain +1 courage and you heal your legs and remove all bleeding tokens. So what we see here with Leechy Springs is the general goal is to have a bold survivor who maybe has some bleeding tokens and or some injuries, so you can try and make the best of this role. Blood Glass Shards is our neutral hunt event. You got your choice. You can investigate. If you have 6+ understanding, then you can ambush the monster. Otherwise, the monster gains +1 damage token. So don't investigate if you don't have the requisite understanding. Otherwise, you should just follow the trail. Roll the dice. There's a chance to be ambushed, but you do gain +1 understanding. And on a 6+, you'll gain +1 understanding in a random hunt event. So early on, this one can feel quite punishing. Having the monster ambush is bad because effectively it gets 2 turns in a row at the start of the showdown, but you should be able to withstand that most of the time, and I think being ambushed isn't as bad as it could be because the monster tends to only get 1 action, and you can usually ensure that's at least going at the survivor who can withstand being hit twice in a row. It's way more effective when you get to ambush the monster, because suddenly you get 4 survivors who are able to have more actions. Main lore sort of interesting thing here is we can see that this is like these blood glass shards are arranged into an art, and this is kind of a message. But we've already established that Crimson Crocodiles are not just sentient, but they're also sapient. Neutral random 2. We'll start with missing faces. Crudely cut holes lit to the ground. Stone faces are missing from each gap underfoot. You nominate survivor to investigate. They roll 1d10. On a 1 to 3, all survivors gain the Terrified status card. This is really bad. On a 4 to 6, we have just some broken rocks. On a 7 to 9, somebody will gain the Glass Mask fighting art. We'll look at that in a moment. On a 10+, Signs of Another Life, you find a naked and scared survivor and you send them to the settlement, gaining +1 population. We'll look at Glass Mask in a moment, but the key thing is on this 1 to 3, if you get a Terrified Survivor status card, it's pretty bad, but be aware that first of all, the Crocodile generally won't have its most powerful Terrified punishing attacks in a full deck. The odds are the lowest they possibly could be. But also if you have Surge, you can surge during a survival flow step after it's targeted you to clear off Terrified. Bear that in mind with deployment. Once you've got Surge, you can make sure that the most likely survivor, the one who's probably going to get attacked, get targeted, does have some insanity so they can at least get rid of Terrified immediately. Glass Mask, here it is. So it's a fighting art. When you depart, you lightly cut your ears, you rub blood all over your face, wait for it to dry, and you gain +3 insanity. And if you have face painting as well, which is a solid innovation that you're almost certainly going to want to have, you create a seal between your glass mask and your armor, and you gain an additional +3 insanity. This is one of those rare fighting arts that can crop up during Ark Survivors. Normally Ark Survivors struggle to get fighting arts, like even get the chance to gain them. This is one of these places where, because it's handing out directly, you could get it. I think Glass Mask is fine. Insanity is pretty good because it is protection for your brain. But obviously Ark Survivors are very unlikely to be able to keep this. They're more likely to turn it into Lummi, which is okay as well. You're gaining more Lummi's fine, but eventually you always end up with way more Lummi than you really need. On the whole, I think this is kind of an okay. It's obviously here to really help you against the Crimson Crocodile by providing that insanity and ensuring you've got as much as possible for protection. But I wouldn't be worried about it if you don't get to keep it. Then we have River of Blood, which almost reminds me of the Elden Ring weapon, Rivers of Blood. A river of blood flows across your path. Strange eyes service to watch you. Each survivor must roll to cross the river. Subtract 1 for your result if you have any heavy gear in your gear grid. Generally, we're trying to avoid having heavy gear spread across all survivors' gear grids anyway, because heavy gear is generally a negative anyhow, so you would try and avoid using heavy gear unless you're already wearing heavy armour if you can. But also +2 if your survivor has a whip, so you know, you could be like, we're hunting a Crimson Crocodile, I'm wearing heavy armour, I'm going to bring along a rawhide whip in my pocket. Whips do have other beneficial uses on hunts here and there, so it might work out. On a 1, you're attacked by a frenzied blood shark. You must prevail, spend all survival at least 1, or suffer a dismembered arm or leg severe injury. If you're a one-handed weapon fighter, then you could choose to suck up this dismembered arm because you only need 1 arm. But it's probably best to try and avoid that if you can. Obviously, if you're wielding 2-handed weapons like a bow, then you don't have much choice. You really need to prevail. Losing a leg is terrible for just about everyone. It slows you down so much. We don't have prosthetics in the game yet, so you just can't really let that happen. Spending the survival is generally worth it. On a 2 to 7, you swallow a mouthful of blood that teems with life. Your digestive tract is mangled. You gain 1 bleeding token and vomit out your unwelcome guests. This is the most typical result. It's okay. On an 8 to 9, you catch something perched on a rock and gain a random vermin resource. That's good. On a 10+, you hear a story within the blood. You gain +1 evasion token. Good. And the immortal disorder, which is actually a negative when fighting the Crimson Crocodile. That's why this ends up landing here in kind of the neutral random pile. It's not completely terrible at all to have, but the top result is not exclusively a positive. Now we have our bad fixed cards, and there's 2 of those. Lantern Mites. The survivors rest under the glow of a lantern growing from a fleshy stalk, and each survivor gains +1 survival. Fantastic. But one after another they start to feel their hair moving at the roots. Small, hard to see insects burrow into their scalps, laying eggs, and each survivor must roll 1d10. The survivor with the highest result eats all the lantern mites off their body and gains +1 survival, but the survivor with the lowest result gains the terrified survivor status card, and they cannot remove it until the showdown ends for any reason, and everyone else gains +2 insanity. We'll really dive into Terrify when we look at the dashboard and the AI cards, but the key thing here is that you don't have much control over who this lands on, and whoever it is, they kind of can't really be your front row. And if you built a specific single character to be your main tank and they get this, then you're in a lot of trouble, which does mean you're rewarded for kind of running 2 frontline bruisers instead of just pure tanks. So that is, they both have reasonably good armor and deal damage out at close range. So at least if one of them becomes terrified, the other one can still bear the brunt of the damage. Finally, you have to also roll a random hunt event. So despite this having some upsides, I hate to see this card. It always causes problems. One survivor becomes an absolute liability, and even if the particular crocodile you're fighting doesn't have the massive Terrified Punish AI cards, still you can't guard or block or dodge, etc, etc. You're in a lot of trouble. And then the other one which is fixed is Immortal Giggle. Survivors with the Immortal Disorder shudder uncontrollably. They set their insanity to 0 and they gain the Terrified status card, and all of the survivors lose half their insanity rounded up. And then you have to draw another Crimson Crocodile hunt event and resolve that, meaning there's more chaos on top of this. 0 insanity, bad. Terrified, bad. Having them both hit you immediately is awful because it costs you actions to clear out Terrified. We'll go into that in detail in a little bit, but this again is pretty bad. On the whole, the Crimson Crocodile hunt event phase is quite swingy. You can get really good stuff. There's a indomitable weapon and inner lantern up for grabs. Or you can have so much Terrified dumped onto your party that you are in a lot of trouble, and it is always worth bearing in mind that there are 9 Crimson Crocodile hunt events, and against a level 3 you're going to see 4 of them, so you should expect on average to be punished at least once or twice. You just need to hope that you don't get the double whammy of Lantern Mites and Immortal Giggle together. Now it's time for the dashboard. We have quite a few status cards to go through for the dashboard. This is because the Crimson Crocodile is a more complicated monster than many of the earlier ones. That's a natural part of the scope. and creep and kind of growth of this game is everything trends slightly towards becoming more and more powerful, and the Crimson Crocodile is at the bleeding edge of danger for Node 1 monsters. You know, we're in the category of monsters that's meant to be the easiest. I personally think this one's the hardest. We will start with the reference card. So, level 1, 11 wounds, 7 basic cards, 3 advanced. 6 movement, 7 toughness. So, as I mentioned before, compared to a White Lion, that's pretty similar, except it has slightly lower toughness. Then it has Immortal Presence, Enchanted Flesh, and Adrenal Adept. We'll look at the status cards all one after another a bit further on. At level 2, it's got a total of 15 AI cards, which means 16 wounds. Its movement goes up to 7, its toughness goes up to 9, and it gets +1 speed and +1 damage. That's all pretty standard. Again, the toughness is a little bit lower than normal. That's fantastic. We want this because we need to burn these monsters down fast. Crimson Crocodiles are going to put you on a clock, and the lower toughness is kind of part of the compensation for that. It keeps Immortal Presence, it keeps Enchanted Flesh, it loses Adrenal Adept and gets Adrenal Master instead, and it gains Blood Soaked. Again, we'll look at all those in a moment. Finally, at level 3, it's got 20 AI cards, so that is a total of 21 wounds required to kill it. 12 basic, 6 advanced, and 2 legendary. I didn't go through the level 2 cards, so they are 9 basic, 5 advanced, and 1 legendary. Worth noting that that 1 legendary can be really swingy, it can be a huge benefit. To return to the level 3, it's got 8 movement, 15 toughness, and +2 speed and +2 damage. This is all quite sort of standard advancement. Again, the toughness is a little bit lower than some of the other monsters. It keeps Immortal Presence, it keeps Enchanted Flesh, Adrenal Master, and Blood Soaked. It gains Blood Secret, and as all level 3 monsters do, it gains Indomitable. We've already been through the Fingerstrum Instinct and why generally you don't want it to happen, so let's just take a look at the basic action. Target is Terrified Threat in range, or closest survivor, and then the Instinct. We have our flow step. It will move and attack the target at 2 speed, 3+ accuracy with 2 damage, and then it has an after damage trigger of if you are terrified, you are devoured, whole, and dead. We will look at terrified on this dashboard, but the big key thing here is that terrified does not let you take defensive actions to try and avoid being hit at all. This gives us as well the Crimson Crocodile's general attack profile: 2 speed, 3+ accuracy, 2 damage. This is absolutely a step up from the White Lions, which is usually 2 speed, 2+ accuracy, but only 1 damage. Trading a loss of 1 accuracy for a gain of 2 damage baseline it's good. Like, it's good for the Crocodile, it's not good for us. And that is even without considering this being terrified. But our key counterplay here is if we are terrified and the monster is on its basic actions because, say, it's lost all of its AI cards, then we can keep our terrified survivors out of range. And if they're knocked down, they're not threats, so they won't be targeted either. This means unless something goes horribly wrong, you're caught off guard, or you're just taking it too risky, you should be able to avoid this auto-death. It is a fair auto-death, which is rare in this game, but I think this is very fair. There is counterplay to this, so just keep in mind what this basic action will do to terrified survivors, and that it doesn't like go after them exclusively. They can get out of range. Okay, Immortal Presence. This is a core part of the mechanics of the Crimson Crocodile. When a survivor has 0 insanity, they gain the Terrified Survivor status card, which is right here next to it. You ignore any bonuses to brain trauma rolls, so accept darkness, etc. That's not going to work to help you, and you're guardless, so you cannot ignore hits, so no dodge, no block, no deflect, things like that. But if you have at least 1 insanity, you can spend a moment to collect yourself by spending activation to archive this card. Generally, your goal is to not get this card in the first place. If you are on a low amount of insanity and just 1 insanity pop would put you down to terrified, it is better to go and spend the actions now to get to the blood pool and gain some insanity rather than do it afterwards, because either way you have to spend an activation to remove this. It is better to gain the insanity and not have to remove it, then gain it, then regain insanity, and then remove the terrified card. It's more efficient to be preventative here. Sometimes though you'll get this card and it's through no fault of your own. Just remember The blood pool is your friend. You should be within walking distance of it throughout the whole showdown. If the crocodiles run too far away from the blood pool, don't run after it. It'll come back. Think of like fighting Adele in Night Rain. You don't chase Adele. You wait for Adele to come back and it will come back. Next we have Adrenal Adept. So this is a big part of the Crimson Crocodile's focus around harming you. What it does is it takes the insanity gains that we would get from the brain trauma table and instead turns them into damage. So you can see here when you would gain insanity from a brain trauma, your body stutters in pain and instead you suffer 1 damage to a random hit location. So you cannot rely on the usual thing of, okay, I have to roll for brain trauma, but at least I'll get insanity, so the later brain trauma rolls in the showdown are further away. No, this is going to give you no insanity, it's going to ping you for a point of damage, and then it's going to leave you with like in the state that you were in before. Below it, if I just take this away and put it there, is the Adrenal Master. So this is whenever you would gain insanity from brain trauma, instead suffer that much damage to a random hit location. This is the version that appears on the level 2 and level 3, as you can see here. So this is like, the monster's not kidding around anymore. This is a huge boom upgrade to its overall sort of threat level on this axis. Like you can be suffering 1d5 damage to a random hit location from this kind of stuff. Again, this is a big part of the pressure that the Crimson Crocodile puts on you. Enchanted Flesh. This is a really cool mechanic. Basically, we have a bunch of these coagulated hit locations that look like this, and they're shuffled together in the deck and they're covered up by the Enchanted Flesh card, and then you draw from the bottom of the deck whenever you're instructed to draw a coagulated hit location. This is a really interesting, cool bit of the Crimson Crocodile's defense mechanism. Effectively, when it takes an injury, it reactively hardens its blood into these, as it describes, translucent scabs that sparkle as it moves, this diamond scabs. And the only weak point for these scabs is the initial point of impact, the place where the coagulated blood is coming out of initially. So if you stab there, which is represented by these blue spots, these blue marks, then you get to wound the location normally. If you attack from anywhere else, then you're not going to break through the scab, and instead you're going to get an automatic failure. So a huge part of the game against the Crimson Crocodile is these cards. I'm going to go through all of them in detail during the hit location portion of this video, but suffice to say, I think thematically it's really cool. Like the crocodile's sort of, the blood is spraying out from here and it's protected everywhere else, but this is the place where it's at its weakest, it's covered it the least, and that is the point you need to strike. So you have to attack from these points. You don't ever want to hit the failures unless you're close to the end, there's no other choice, and you've got somebody who's like, I can take the punishment. Another really neat part of this is you can actually track a lot easier what these cards are, because once you reveal one, it stays in the hit location deck. You know what it is when it turns up, and also in some cases there's only one of this card. There's 4 of these, which all face to the right, but there's only one that faces to the left, so sometimes you can have perfect information. Same here, only one here. I think information on the backs of hit location card decks and AI card decks is some of the best mechanics that haven't really been properly explored. The Monster Hunter world actually does a really good job of giving you info on the back of the AI cards without giving away too much, and I think it has the best back of the card AI system so far. Really good. But I think this is the best back of the hit location card mechanic we have at the moment. Okay, 2 more to go. I'm going to do Blood Soaked first. This turns all the vasodilated hit locations into super dense. That matters if you're using frail weapons, that matters if you're using honed weapons, which are blood glass, which are made from the Crimson Crocodile. But if you don't care about super dense at all, if your weapon doesn't care, then this doesn't have too much of an impact. Blood Secrets, when the trap's drawn for the first time, it just gets discarded and shuffled back in, and this flips up and becomes Diffuser Heart. The monster gains +2 damage, +2 movement, and draws an extra AI every turn. So, as we know, Blood Secret happens with the level 3. This means the first time you hit the track, then suddenly the monster's going to kick into overdrive. Also, it starts to gradually gain these death counters up on this card, and when it has 13 of them, because 13 is a very significant number in the world of Kingdom Death, then the Crimson Crocodile dies. Now, that does mean potentially you can kite it to death if you need to, if you're desperate. But given that it has +2 movement and draws 2 AI cards a turn, that can be very difficult. And it's very unlikely that the monster's going to be close to death by the time you hit the trap the first time. Ultimately, this is why I say that the monster puts you very much on a clock. Okay, that's all our dashboard related stuff. We're now going to move on to the AI deck. Begin with the layout. I put all the attacks on the left side, then we've got Intimidate, then we've got moods, and finally we've got traits and other things that just once they happen, they happen. And then from top to bottom is the softest to the hardest. This is all in comparison to the basic action, so these attacks are kind of scarier than your normal Node 1 monster, given this extra terrified mechanic. So comparatively speaking, you can't really compare these to the White Lion stuff. They're more dangerous and more complicated. Okay, beginning with our softer AI cards, we've got here, these are the attacks. You'll notice there's a pair of 21,000 Newton bites, a pair of barbed tail whips, a pair of mocking bites, and then there's one repeating bite and one saline snap, which is my favourite card name in the monster. I love saline snap as a name, it's fantastic. So, 21,000 Newton bite, this is the move that the Crimson Crocodile puts out against you at the very start of the prologue fight, so you should be familiar with it. Its primary target is a threat, that's a standing survivor or a survivor who counts as a threat with the most tokens that's in range. After that, it'll pick closest survivor instead, and then instinct. It moves in its synchronic attacks. So synchronic attacks are a new thing that's introduced in the Gambler's Chest. Basically, it's one attack roll versus everyone in the area. And you can see that this bite covers the 6 spaces directly in front of the crocodile. So row of 3 and then another row of 3, or listed as columns in this example image here. This means generally you don't want to have survivors standing adjacent or in any way, not orthogonally or diagonally. You usually want your survivors to all stand at least with one space between them and any other survivor, including diagonals, because you don't really want this to hit multiple survivors. It is 2 speed, 3+ accuracy, and 21 damage. However, if you are not terrified or you have hearing, then you only take 1 damage. That's because this is designed to punish terrified survivors and deaf survivors. They cannot hear the noise of the attack coming in, and they will take the full 21 damage, which really is going straight to a severe injury against any survivor that will typically see. Getting to 21 armor points or 19 armor points is incredibly unlikely in most campaigns, and if you are there, then usually you're past Crimson Crocodile time. So this seems really, really scary, but it's just part of this. Don't let your survivors get terrified. If they do, keep out of range of the Crimson Crocodile until they can recover, even if you have to kite the crocodile away from the blood pool to give them space. Barbed Tail Whip. This is closest threat in range, then instinct. It's another synchronic. It will move and then it will synchronic attack, and you position it to put the target in the right spot, which is this pink spot. That's basically the center middle back where the tail is located on the miniature. So it's fairly easy to remember that. And then it will hit everything that is adjacent with the exception of these 2 spots here. Again, if you're trying to space out your survivors reasonably well, you can reduce the amount that this happens. Also, Lost Tail will effectively disable this card, so that's a great location to critically wound. It does bleed 1, knockback 5. Despite having such a big area, this is generally not too hard to avoid as long as you have reasonable positioning. If you know it's going to do barbed tail whips, you can ensure that the closest threat is in such a position that other survivors will not end up basically in any of these. And incredibly, you can have a survivor standing here and they'll get away with it, but you probably don't want to do that because of, as mentioned, 21 Newton bites. These are 2 profiles you want to bear in mind when you're positioning. You want to think, okay, Do I have more than one survivor in what would be the front 6 spaces? Do I have more than one survivor in what would be all of these spaces adjacent after it's finished moving? You can very easily visualize that by looking at the 9 spaces where it would be directly in front of the target survivor, the threat, whenever it's been hit. So it's not too hard to avoid this from hitting more than one. Generally, if you get caught by this, it's your fault, or you've been very unlucky. Mocking Bite is that other paired attack. This chooses closest threat facing in range or closest survivor, and the final option of course is Instinct. It's another move and attack target with a survival opportunity. 2 speed, 3+ accuracy, 1 damage, and if you are terrified, then you get knocked down. This is the softest punishment that hits any terrified survivor. This is, I think, probably the softest AI card in the entire deck. If I am pruning, that is, I'm specifically letting some AI cards resolve and then removing the others as wounds. This is a card I'd look to leave in the deck, because I'm really happy to see it. It also has Lost Humour, and the monster seems to wilt, its animated fingers hanging limply, and it gets knocked down. So we've got another way of just sort of blanking attacks and getting benefits. A knockdown monster is an easy target to hit and doesn't really react and doesn't get back up. So just a great opportunity, very soft attack. Repeating Bite. So this is a new kind of card. It explains it on the top here. It's a repeat card. Once you resolve it, you put it back on top of the deck, and while it's face up, players cannot manipulate the AI deck. You can't move this down, you can't do anything, it's sat there. Interestingly as well, this means if you flip it face up with AI scouting, then it's going to lock in and stop you being able to manipulate the deck any further. You put a token on this card, then closest threat facing in range or closest survivor, and it will move and attack. It's 2 speed, 3+ accuracy, base 0 damage, but it gets +1 damage for each token on it, so it's effectively base 1 damage. You do want to remove this. The first attack's not too bad. Even the second attack is softer than the basic action, but if it gets beyond that, then it will become quite problematic as it starts to keep scaling its damage further up and up. Definitely need to remove this. You've got to deal with it. It's not going away. Last of all, we have the Saline Snap. This is the only advanced AI card that I consider to be quite soft. It goes to threat in blind spot, which is an unusual targeting, or closest survivor. Again, we got instinct and survival opportunity. Then it moves and attacks, 2 speed, 3+ accuracy, 2 damage, and the after damage trigger is bleed 2 and then brain damage equal to your number of bleeding tokens. And then the reason I put it in softs is if you manage to inflict a busted glands severe injury, then the monster looks sick and it gets a -1 toughness token. This one I was borderline putting into the middle category of difficulty, but it's having that severe injury to negate it and just turn it into -1 toughness is I can't overlook that. It's very good. Critting the Crimson Crocodile for severe injuries, for permanent injuries, is phenomenally good, and this is just, you've already seen how many that there are that just knock the Crimson Crocodile down, and now this one just makes it easier and easier to wound. Okay, we're now onto our mid category. These are ones that I think are comparable or slightly more dangerous than the base action. First we have Crimson Snap. We've got 2 copies of this. It's almost an exact copy of the basic action, except its targeting is threat with least insanity in range. That is effectively very similar to a terrified target, and it will pick a terrified target if they're there, but it also means it's going to go after whoever has the lowest insanity. On the attack front wise, it's 2 speed, 3+ accuracy, 2 damage, with if you are terrified as an after damage trigger, then you are devoured whole dead. Cracked molars do cancel this, which is nice. So again, severe injuries, very good at disabling the Crimson Crocodile. Axe Masters have a great time against this monster. Then we got Hail of Fingers. This is a ranged attack. They're quite rare in monsters. The Tyrant is probably the biggest example of a monster with a lot of ranged attacks. This, if I remember correctly, is the only ranged attack that the Crimson Crocodile has. It chooses closest threat in range, followed by closest survivor, followed by finger strum. We got a survival opportunity, then it moves into range and attacks. Its range is 6, so it's going to stop at 6 spaces away or not move if it's nearer. It gives +1 speed for each card in the monster's wound stack. So If this is the first AI card that you draw, it is incredibly weak at 1 speed. But if it's right near the end, just remember that we looked at a Crimson Crocodile that could have 20 odd AI cards in its wound stack, so this could be a lot. It is range 6, 1 speed, scaling up, 7 plus accuracy and 1 damage. And its baseline, this is a Founding Stone, which I think is really a fun piece of design. It's got like the Founding Stone base accuracy and it's been flung. That's because the symmetry there is that the Crimson Crocodile has stone faces along its spine, if you remember. So I think that's a nice bit of poetry, having it rhyme. Then, if the monster attacked with 10 plus speed, it's fired off too many of its scab fingers. So this explains how those fingers were found crawling. In the hunt phase, it launches them. It can launch and regrow fingers. Monster gains -1 toughness token and is knocked down. So there is compensation if it goes and attacks with a massive amount of speed. 10 plus speed is still pretty scary. If you think of the average odds of that, on a 7 plus, we're looking at 4 hits if it was firing at 10 speed, for example. So evasion, as always, is a great stat. You want it on survivors, especially as you know this is a kind of closest threat thing. On the whole, if it wasn't for how variable this card is and how it can be really soft or really hard, I would have put it in a different pile, but it shifts up and down depending on whereabouts in the showdown you end up resolving this card. Then we've got Vampire Bite. It chooses last threat to attack in range. So your control for this would be having your toughest target attack last. Otherwise it chooses closest threat in field of view, which it means not the survivors in the blind spot or behind obstacles. This is a little unusual. If you notice, most of the time the crocodile's just going after closest survivor for its second target choice. Flow step and a move and attack, 2 speed, 3 plus accuracy, 2 damage, and then after damage, so if you take damage, you're gaining immortal disorder, and you're gaining the anemic impairment. Anemic is, it takes 1 fewer bleeding token to kill you. This can be gained multiple times. You probably don't ever want to have a survivor who suffers this 5 times, because 0 bleeding tokens is a heck of a number to die on. And Cracked Molar results in archiving this card, so that's not as strong as these ones where it just gets discarded for no effect, but at least it's gone. Finally, we got Whipping and Slamming, which sounds like a song title. This is another repeat card. You place a token on this card and target the closest survivor, and then it will do the tail whip attack. It will move so it's in the right spot, same kind of thing, but it gets +1 speed and +1 damage to each token on it, so its base is 1 speed, 3 plus accuracy, 1 damage, but actually the first time it's going to resolve this, it will be 2 speed, 3 plus accuracy, 2 damage, and it will keep increasing up. So just like the repeating snap, you want to remove this. You don't want to leave it on top, unless somehow you're able to be far enough away that it's going to take a few turns for it to get to you, but even then you need to get rid of this. Bleed and knockback. Dying from bleed is a threat against the Crimson Crocodile, but it's not as prominent as it is against the Butcher. You should be able to handle it with just 1 set of bandages to patch up everyone who starts bleeding. Now we're on to our scary AI cards. There's only 2 for attacks anyway. Our first one is Exsanguinate. This is a legendary attack, so you would expect it to be in this scary category. It chooses first of all threat with least insanity in range, or closest survivor in range, or it goes on to its instinct. It's important to note that if you are all out of range, in many of the cases it'll just run after someone and that's fine, that's all it does. Here it cares about range and it will start finger strumming, which is a lot scarier, as mentioned about with finger strums before. Otherwise, normally it's hard for the Crimson Crocodile to get to its instinct. This card, it's easier to get there. You have a survival opportunity, flow step, then you have 4 speed, 3 plus accuracy, 2 damage, and the after damage trigger is you reveal the monster's hit location deck, and the target gains bleeding tokens equal to the number of coagulated hit locations in the monster's deck and discard, and then you shuffle the deck. Shuffling the deck will put everything back in, including the discard. This can just be instant death from bleeding if it lands all in the wrong order. 5 bleeding tokens kills you normally, that's 5 coagulated hit locations. The monster can have more than that. If the targeted survivor survives Exsanguinate, then we get to go to the Beating Backwards story event, which we'll look at now. Your blood runs the wrong way, sucked in reverse. Your heart beats convulsively in defiance. Each heartbeat desperately draws the blood back through your veins, for it only to be pulled back into the Crimson Crocodile's mouth. You are unable to escape the monster's tortuous grasp. The fang pierces deeper and your vision darkens. Your slackened lids descend like a final curtain. The last thing you see is your reflection in the monster's spinning eyes. A weak, maddened grin spreads over your bloodless face. You change. You roll a d10. On a 1 or a 2, you shrivel, reduced to a husk. The monster licks its lips, spits you out. You are knocked down. You gain Hunt XP until you retire, and then the monster heals monster level wounds. Hunt XP until you retire doesn't kick you out of the showdown unless you're a saviour. A saviour would blink out of existence at this point, but any normal survivor can still finish the fight, but after that they are retired, so they won't be going out to hunt without other ways of getting them out there. On a 3, 4, 5 or a 6, your straining heart accelerates to an untenable hyper state, depriving the monster of the last few sips of your blood. The suction stops and you take advantage, freeing yourself. You gain the Death Count Survivor status card and Phobophobia. If you already have Death Count, you place a Death Count token on the card. We'll go through Death Counts when we get to the trap. Phobophobia is also fear of blood, so bleeding tokens gained, knocked down. Significantly, if the settlement has innovated bloodletting, then this skips this entirely. You feel the monster's heartbeat slow to match yours and you proceed to the 7+ result. Your eyes spin, revealing a new aspect of perception. The other survivors' blood vessels glow a vibrant, mouth-watering red. You see their quickened pulses flashing like an alarm. Breathtaking pain deep in your chest sends a warm flush through your body. Your heart now has a new chamber. You gain +3 insanity and the secret fighting art aerial transfusion. I can't remember if I did mention it, but the whole spinning eyes thing is very much reminiscent of some of the Disney crocodiles, like in Peter Pan, and I think in Sword in the Stone, when Madame Mim turns into a pink crocodile. I think her eyes spin a bit there. Definitely the hypnotic kind of action of the Peter Pan hook crocodile is a reference. And our secret fighting art, which is aerial transfusion. It requires 2 additional bleeding tokens to kill you, and during your act you may spend an activation to freely rearrange all survivors' bleeding tokens. Hard to get this. You can see it only comes through this particular event, which does have a chance of outright retiring your survivor, effectively removing them from any future hunts, but heck of an ability. Rearranging survivors' bleeding tokens, that can be used with the armor set to great effect. That can be used to round out survivors to make sure that they have 2 bleeding tokens, so that those are both removed with 1 activation of bandages, or shift them off from a survivor who's close to dying to spread them through everyone else. It's a really, really useful utility tool, and the fact that you now need 7 bleeding tokens to kill you also helps make this stronger. You don't really have any control over getting this. I mean, Exsanguinate is such a beast of a card that it could well just kill you outright anyway. There may be fighting arts that can help that unconscious fighter, or puts you to 6 bleeding tokens would kill you instead of the usual 5. And also you have other forms of bleed preventation, or even just not gaining bleeding tokens from some fighting arts. It's very variable. Okay, let's get on to our intimidates. We have 1 up here. This is Haunting Bite. Target will be a survivor that's last suffered damage. Flow step, move and intimidate target. So if you have ways of ignoring intimidates or immunity to it, that helps. Same with any intimidates. If adjacent, the monster's jaw decides lock onto yours. Its breathing quickening to match your own. Sinew groans as the monster's jaws stretch impossibly wide and snap shut in an instant. The pressure of displaced air rushes at you. You are knocked down and suffer monster level brain damage. Notably, if you're able to get beyond the monster's movement range, this does nothing. So this is, like many attacks, an opportunity for dash cancelling, where the monster targets you and you dash just beyond the maximum range of its movement. So it's already locked onto you as target, it's forced to follow after you, but it doesn't actually get to resolve the rest of the card because you're out of range. Rare that you get Intimidate that you can do this with, but here's one. Then we have here 3 more. These are Hypnotic Strut Immortal's Roar, and Sonic Belly Roar. Hypnotic Strut. The monster full moves towards the centre of the showdown board, then turns to face the most survivors. Its target will be all non-immortal survivors in its facing. It will intimidate all targets. Monster's many fingers gesticulate in a hypnotic wave while its head sways counter to their rhythm. All survivors suffer the flea brain trauma, so that is knockdown, full movement towards the nearest board edge, and then you would gain insanity, but you're not going to because it's Crimson Crocodile. You're going to take damage instead. Immortal's Roar. All non-death survivors. Now, quite often with stuff like this, it's like, okay, great, I can be deaf and not worry about it, but the Crimson Crocodile is very bad to be deaf against. You probably don't want to have your Lantern Armor's earplugs be active against this, even though Immortal's Roar wouldn't work against you. Flow Step. Intimidate all targets. Each target rolls 1d10. If the result is a 4+ and higher than their courage, they suffer knockback 5 and monster level brain damage. So, obviously as your courage goes higher, you're less likely to be affected by this, but then also it performs a basic action targeting the furthest survivor in range. Quite hard to avoid that. Remember, the basic action has that auto death if you're terrified, so you do need to pay attention, and you really gotta hold on to this flow step to dash away if the survivor it would target is terrified. Luckily, being terrified doesn't stop you dashing. And finally, on the intimidates, we have the Sonic Belly Roar. The monster snaps its massive jaws shut and emits a deep and guttural belly rumble that violently shakes the ground. Flow step. Pick target all survivors not on terrain. You can be standing on top of the blood pool. Technically, you'll be standing on top of the survivor corpse, and there is at least one other piece of terrain in the showdown. This intimidates all targets. The monster leaps 3 spaces backwards, pushing its massive chest into the ground as its fingers part, sending the roar into the stone faces. All targets roll 1d10 on a 4+, then knock down and suffer monster level brain damage. On a 7+, the vibrations also shatter a random fragile gear in their gear grid. Archive it. Really, the counterplay to this is to bring as much terrain to the showdown as you possibly can. There's Faceism, with an E, that allows you to generate extra terrain via its tenant. You also can have Strategist and similar, or Gatherism, which will produce more terrain into the showdown. The more terrain you can stand on, the better. Otherwise, you could be in the blood pool to try and avoid suffering this too much. Or as I said, standing on top of the corpse, the survivor corpse. It's pretty bad, especially if you have fragile gear. Fragile's one of those negative keywords that you just kind of have to live with and accept sometimes it's going to break, because there's not a lot of counterplay. The main trick is if you do have a Crimson Crocodile that you know does Sonic Belly Roars, and you've been lucky the first time around not having your fragile gear archived, stick on terrain. Stick on terrain until it's done its Sonic Belly Roar, or you've been through another lap of the deck. Moods. We got Boiling Blood. When it comes into play, draw AI. That's pretty standard for most moods, that they go into play on the dashboard and then draw a replacement. Monster's Blood begins to superheat, stirring everything nearby into a rage. When a survivor wounds the monster, they gain the priority target token and suffer the frenzy brain trauma. Or when a survivor suffers a frenzy brain trauma, you discard Boiling Blood. Priority target means that next time it's picking targets, you'll skip all the targeting and you'll be the targeting regardless. You can take advantage of that by ensuring you're outside of movement range, so it'll have to come after you, but it can't reach you, can't do anything. Frenzy brain trauma, +1 speed, +1 strength, can't use fighting arts, can't use weapon proficiencies, and normally you gain insanity, but here you suffer the penalties instead from the adrenal gland. This one isn't too bad because essentially it does its thing and then falls into the discard pile kind of immediately, and you get to decide who is going to wound the monster, so you can line this up a bit, ensure that they wound the monster and they're at enough of a distance to be safe if you have a ranged weapon, or they could run away and be able to dash cancel when it comes after them. It's easy to counterplay this. Mostly you're just paying the tax of that frenzy and the negatives that come with it. Then we've got Delighted, which medium level, sort of medium danger. Again, replaces itself with an AI card. The monster can barely contain its delight as the pungent foam leaks from its maw. While this is in play, the monster has -1 accuracy and +1 speed for each terrified survivor. And when a survivor dies, the monster is knocked down in excitement and discard Delighted. This one Gaining the extra speed outweighs the loss of accuracy in most cases. Now, if you can of course push the monster to the hard cap of only hitting on 10s, then Delighted is barely an inconvenience, but normally you just really want to get rid of the monster before a survivor dies, because we don't want our survivors to die if we can avoid it. So often the way I look at this card is we need to heavily manage our Terrified, which we're trying to do anyway. But significantly, I don't intend for a survivor to die, so the monster's effectively wounded itself because it's removed this card from the AI deck, and now it's got one less wound to kill it as long as the survivor doesn't die. Finally, we got Immortal Rain. I really like this card. When this comes into play, the monster throws its head back, screeching with laughter into the darkness above. A shower of blood pours down in answer, dousing the battlefield in vivid crimson. All survivors adjacent to the monster gain +3 insanity, then you draw an AI card. While this is in play, blood continues to rain down from above. All damage suffered by survivors is converted to brain damage. When a survivor would suffer a random brain trauma, they suffer mortal terror instead. And when a coagulated hit location is wounded, you would discard Immortal Rain. So the visual aesthetics of this is what I really love. Suddenly having blood pouring from the sky, all the survivors just coated in it, slick in it, just phenomenal thematics. The card itself, I'd rather not see. As much as I like it, I don't want the monster to play this, but we do have a way of getting rid of it. Mortal Terror, by the way, is the 1/2 result on the brain trauma deck, as in you're dead. So this is really bad, simply put, because suddenly you're just taking brain damage instead of any other kind of damage, and as soon as you're down to brain trauma territory, you're donezo. Finally, we have 2 traits. We've got Blood King. Dried blood from the survivor's weapons rehydrates, forming dizzying fractal patterns. The monster feverishly reads these trailing patterns, grinning wildly. After it suffers a wound from a weapon, it adapts, and you place a red lantern token on that weapon to note this. Future wound attempts with that weapon against coagulated hit locations automatically fail unless your wound result is a 10. When the monster is defeated, gain a random Crimson Crocodile Indomitable resource. Having this pop out when you're fighting the level 2 Crimson Crocodile is so huge. It feels really bad when you first read it, but the key thing to note is that this is only affecting you against coagulated hit locations, and a survivor can always pivot to punching one of those hit locations to get a second wound attempt. You get strength bonuses when hitting coagulated hit locations, so going for Fist and Tooth is very valid even if your survivor isn't great at Fist and Tooth normally. That extra Indomitable resource can be massive. I've had this drop the Dome Buster and the Immortal Arm early. They've been game changers. So fantastic. So this is just great in all circumstances. The negative is not too bad. I almost considered putting this in the soft category, but you do have to think a little bit about how your play is, and it can be a problem if it turns up very early and you get a lot of coagulates, but on the whole, I'm always happy to see this. I'm not happy to see Death Clot. The monster hyperventilates, its fingers stretch around itself, palpitating its body, aggressively squirting clotting hormones into the air. The survivor's hearts swell like the Grinch. Each non-immortal survivor gains Death Count Survivor status card and adds 1 armor point to all hit locations for each bleeding token they have, and if you already have Death Count, then you advance the Death Count by 1. When a survivor suffers a brain trauma, they also gain a Death Count token. We'll look at Death Counts, as I said, during the hit location section around the trap, because it's mostly triggered by the trap, but the key thing here is, oh boy, everyone's on a clock. Everyone's on a massive clock. You really need to deal with this as fast as possible. I've mentioned it before, but I've really got to stress how good Surge is, because you want to burst down the Crimson Crocodile. It's not going to let you stall out the Showdown. It's not going to let you whittle it down a piece at a time. It's going to force you to kill it or be killed. And this card really does that. Hit locations. So, layout first. Left, over here. We've got no reactions on normal wounds. This column is all the failure wound, coagulated kind of hit locations. These are self-archiving that then become coagulated over here. We got failures, we got reflexes, trap, and the aforementioned death count card. So, safe spots to attack the Crimson Crocodile from. Anywhere that's not orthogonal to it is great. So attacking on a corner, like here, is fine. Attacking from more than 2 spaces in front is generally fine. Attacking from the back is mostly fine as well. The reason for that is it's different to other Node 1 and Node 2 monsters in how it reacts, in that it's kind of a little bit unpredictable. You have 4 where it just moves forwards 2 spaces. You've got 3 where it moves to the right full move, 4 where it moves to the left full move, and then 2 where it turns to face you and then moves backwards, which are these 2 failure results here, and they have other triggers on them. Ultimately that means your safest spots are not orthogonally aligned with it or attacking it from behind. Generally, if you're gonna hit it from behind, you want to make sure nobody else is directly in front or to either side. However, some of these cards are self-archiving, so that will alter the odds during the fight, and whatever's in the discard pile also won't have an impact. So this is one of those where I will line up the archived cards in a little pile so I know what's gone from the left and right rolls, what's still in there. I mean, once we remove all of them, we're just down to these 2 for the left and right rolls, and also looking at the discard pile. So to provide a very simple example, if you look at the discard pile and there are 4 move forwards in the discard pile, you know you can attack it from the front with impunity, because the most it's going to do is hit the trap and reset the deck. It's not going to move forward over you. So that's just something to pay attention to. But if you're not sure, just make sure nobody's forward, left or right, and then stab it from behind. On to the specifics then. First up, over here, we've got the Pale Cloaca and the Juicy Jowls. Both of these I consider to be very positive locations to hit. Pale Cloaca gives you the Pseudopenis on a critical, and on a 3+, it knocks you back 5 and gives you paint. That's an immediate drop of paint. That's the settlement's got paint now. Boom, everybody's got dash in the fight. Amazing. Free paint, love to see it. Free paint, free in a lantern. Surge, amazing. Juicy Jowls on the crit gives you a random monster resource, and Cracked Molar, which affects some AI cards, which we love to see, and it is relevant AI cards that it is affected. Then our middle column is here. This crit varies in how good it is. So you always get a random monster resource, and you can stop there. So at a minimum it's that. But you have the option to plunge your hands into the opening and drag out Spooling Threads of Viscera, which will give you +3 courage, which can trigger an immediate bold during the showdown. That's good. +3 insanity. Insanity, very useful for fighting the Crimson Crocodile. And you gain Marrow Hunger, which is fine. Marrow Hunger is a fine little thing, but fine little impairment. But on a 3+, if you roll dice and on a 3+, you're going to get murder into the timeline for the next year, and that can be really bad. If you do not have what we call murder bait, which is a defunct, useless survivor who has lots of hunt XP, then you could be losing someone who's really good. But if you're playing with ARC survivors, the homicidalism philosophy is worth paying that price, especially if you can get it early. Currently, it is in a very abusable position. Basically, putting Dark Urge onto non-homicidalism survivors is nuts, and then you can use stuff like Sacrifice to generate lots of stats. Team Death are aware of it, they're going to look at it and fix it, but for the moment there's a small window. If you don't have that, and you're just playing with normal fighting arts, different matter, you don't really want murder, to be honest, because it doesn't have really any upsides. At the bottom here we've got the 99 Finger Spine. It's down here because it's impervious, which means you can't ever wound it. You'll know this from the prologue fight against the Crimson Crocodile. This is the first hit location up there. When you crit it, you get to put the sparkling upper back in play on top, and it becomes a persistent injury that just sits there. Now, it also gives -1 evasion token. That's separate from the 99 Finger Spine, so if the Finger Spine gets removed from play, and it can get shuffled back into the hit location deck, that is possible, the token still stays out there, so you could repeatedly break the 99 Finger Spine, have it regrow and get more -1 evasion tokens, which is more accuracy for all of your survivors. That's pretty solid, but ultimately it's a kind of niche. unlikely to happen situation. Onto our vasodilated locations. You can ignore vasodilated against the level 1, against the level 2 and 3. They're super dense. Each vasodilated location has the same wound text, so we'll look at that. This is compulsive, means it cannot be cancelled. You wouldn't want to cancel it, but it's locked in that it can't be. The monster recoils, its fresh blood instantly congealed into hard, translucent scabs, and you archive this, and then you draw a coagulated hit location and place that on top of the hit location deck. That's that aforementioned ability the monster has to cover its body in unbreakable diamond blood, with the only vulnerable point being the point where the coagulation is starting and you have to break there. If you attack anywhere else, the attack will fail. You'll still put the wound, the coagulated hit location, into the discard pile for later, but you'll also have to suffer any failure penalties. We'll look at coagulates in more detail in a moment. They're actually fairly easy to memorize, and once they're in the hit location deck, they're in there for the rest of the showdown, meaning that when they come up again you should know exactly which one it is, or at least be able to make an educated guess based on the ones that have been shuffled in. Failure on the blushing brow here is you get disarmed. Disarm is a lovely mechanic. I think it's really nicely designed. You put a disarm token on the weapon you were attacking with and then place it 5 spaces away. You've got to move to that, a second copy of the same token 5 spaces away. You've got to move to that second token, step on it, and then you remove both tiles and get your weapon back. You also get to ignore this if you're using Fist and Tooth. You probably don't want to be Fist and Toothing into a normal Crimson Crocodile, because of all these vasodilated locations, none of them could be critically wounded. This can cause issues in throwing a Founding Stone, etc. You've got to gamble quite a bit with that, but once these are gone, Fist and Tooth in coagulated locations is great. The other one is in the top row is the blushing twisting back. All I'm going to do now is go through the failures on these. The wounds are more or less exactly the same. The failure here is that bleeding wounds, pucker and sizzle, erupting with fresh pain. All adjacent survivors suffer brain damage equal to the number of bleeding tokens. This is in the top row because you can remove bleeding tokens with bandages. You could just not be adjacent as well when this happens. So there's plenty of counterplay to this. It's fairly easy to get around it. You shouldn't be suffering from that too much. Then middle row, we've got the blushing bulging neck. This is one of those where it moves forwards. It goes 2 spaces forward, and that will naturally cause a collision and displacement if there's a survivor in front, and then it will crane its neck back and wink at the attacker in a cheeky fashion, and they suffer a monster level +1 brain damage. We've already been through all the problems of brain damage. Not great to have this happen. Down here on this lot, even though there's 5 cards, they're effectively doing the same thing, which is they have the monster full move without turning to either the left or right, and on collision you suffer monster level +1 damage. Because this is not an attack, there's no dodging this. You can dash on the reaction, which will give you a survival window to get out the way, but ideally you just shouldn't be there in the first place. As mentioned, there are 3 rights and 4 lefts. The others are down here. Essentially, this is why I'm like, be very careful on the flanks. Tracking the discard pile can really help you know what's going on and how to navigate it. Right, up here we've got 1 in our pure failure. This is the parry location. Parry is a mechanic where this hit location cannot be wounded unless you critically wound it, which means the failure is always going to trigger unless you get a critical wound. The failure, if you're attacking with a melee weapon, disarms you, as mentioned before, but you gain +1 survival and +1 insanity as a compensation. That's why this is in the top row, because it feels okay to be parried. You get 2 useful things. Critical wound is amazing. You get +1 luck token and a vomit-soaked random monster resource. Hopefully it's not really vomit-soaked. Keep babies, dogs and cats away from your magic cards, or Kingdom Death cards. Your magic cards as well, but also your Kingdom Death cards. Okay, down here we've got 1. Middle row, fleshy armpit. It does the glide forward that I've talked about before with the cheeky wink. On critical wound, you become awash with Crimson Crocodile Stink and you gain a +1 evasion token. Then at the start of your next act, you may spend 1 survival to concentrate on how stench can heighten senses, and if you're successful, you discard the token and gain a permanent +1 evasion. So concentrate is you immediately end your act, and you have to try and concentrate to the start of your next act. To successfully concentrate, you cannot perform any kind of action, move for any region, suffer knockdown, suffer any kind of damage, or gain any kind of bleeding or negative attribute tokens. So it's a little tough to do this, but it's a great bonus. Alternatively, if you've got gourmandism, you may be able to just consume the evasion token and turn that into a permanent +1 evasion regardless. It's just a really good critical wound. For obvious reasons, permanent stat gains are great. Evasion is a great stat that everybody appreciates having because it reduces monsters' odds of hitting you by 10%. Okay, at the bottom here we've got 2. The failure is identical for both of these. This is the backs away from you, so the monster's lower jaw drops open, its long tongue undulating hypnotically. Turn the monster to face the attacker and move 3 spaces back. The monster suffers the flea brain trauma, so that is they will get knocked down and full move towards the nearest board edge. And if they're immortal, they suffer the frenzy brain trauma instead. We've talked about frenzy earlier. These are both not ideal. The dealing brain damage is the gaining insanity part of these becomes dealing of brain damage, so that's not really what we want to deal with there. Critical wound on the fleshy body is a random monster resource, and it gets -1 movement token. That makes it easier to kite this monster, which is always nice. Dash cancelling, very, very useful. The wrinkled gums, same top bit, bottom. You gain the lustrous tooth, strange resource, and if you're in the monster's facing, which to be honest you probably shouldn't be, but if you are, you will get to draw another hit location. I'm not interested in blind drawing extra hit locations. I think that's kind of dangerous. And also, as mentioned, I don't think you should be attacking the Crimson Crocodile from its front facing a lot of the time, because there are 4 hit location cards where it's just going to ride over you. But that can be okay. It is worth noting that being knocked down through a collision with the monster isn't a big deal if it happens during the survivor's turn, because you'll skip the monster's turn, not be a threat, and then stand up. So that is something you can do, just attack from the front facing. But you really don't want your tank to be standing in a place where that's going to happen to them, because somebody else is going to need to take the hit. This is the lustrous tooth, strange resource. There we go. It's a perfect bone with it's just had eons of tongue polishing to make it the perfect tooth. You put it over with all the others. It doesn't really have anything that it's specifically used for, but it is nice to get more perfect resources. So that's the failures. Let's get on to our reflexes. Reflexes are always the most dangerous because there's not much you can do to avoid them happening. You just got to pay the penalty. These are both moving forward reflexes, so all of the things we've discussed in the past about these. Then we have the crits over here with the pale fin base. You rupture a poison brewing gland within the monster's tail. It gains a -1 toughness token as poison spreads through its body. You gain a random monster resource, and then you get a persistent injury of busted glands, which we see in the cards that get cancelled by that. The -1 toughness token is really nice as well, just increases the odds that each of your hits counts for progress towards killing the monster. Then we have the pale fin, which is critical. You gain the priority target token and you discard a mood in play. I'm not too fussed about discarding the moods, but obviously being able to discard the legendary one, that does matter. And if you are the sole target of the next AI card, so if the next AI card only targets you and nobody else, then you can embrace the monster's hatred. If you do that, you're doomed to the attack. That means no block, no deflect, no dodge, no ways of avoiding whatever it's going to do to you, but then you get a permanent +1 strength. If you've got a bunch of soak and you've got ways of scouting or manipulating the AI deck, this can be really good. Strength isn't worth risking dying over. It's a good stat, but weapons can give you strength, so it's not as important as many of the other stats. Overall, you've got to judge this case by case. You've got to look at it and think, what's the worst that could happen? Is the worst that could happen that I die? Is that likely? If not, you may just want to suck this up, because it's nice to get stat bonuses that don't require spending of survival. Down here, we got 2. These are both super dense. They're always super dense, so important to note that against Crimson Crocodile, you've got a lot more chances of breaking your frail weapons or knocking homed off, which is a Crimson Crocodile, Crimson Crockery based mechanic. It's a better version of frail in my opinion. It's a lot more interesting to interact with. There is no crit on the blushing body. Very importantly, this is going to take the 99 finger spine hit location from either the discard pile, or if it's in play as a persistent injury, or even as an unresolved hit location, and it's going to put it back on top of the hit location deck, so you have to deal with the 99 finger spine. Again, that also gives the opportunity of getting another -1 evasion token. Salted Snout, again, one of these roll locations. Crit will give you +1 strength as you grind along the stones on the monster's back, and you restore honed. You really shouldn't count on getting this honed restore. The saw, I think it's Bloodglass Saw is its name, has a little bit of extra luck on it, so maybe that can manage it, but it's very rare that this actually pays out. So we now have the trap. This is, I think, one of the better designed traps. I think it's very good. All survivors are doomed. The monster's many fingers gesture in a hypnotic wave. The attacker gains the terrified survivor status card. It's worth noting that if you had insanity, you'll still have that insanity, so you can get rid of the terrified very quickly, but not while you're still doomed. The monster accelerates your heart rate. You gain the death count survivor status as well. If you already have it, you put a death count token on the card. The monster giggles, full moves away from all survivors, and then turns to face the attacker. So, you're now in a situation where you're terrified and you've got death count. In the case of terrified, you should have insanity, so you can get rid of this via an action, but the awkward part is you now are suffering from a death count. And this means you've got this card with the number 5 on it. At the end of each round, you gain +1 survival, and you place a death counter on this card. You may surge an additional time each round for each token on this card, if you have surge. And when there's 5+ tokens on this card, your heart bursts, killing you instantly. So effectively, the survivor who has a death count is now on a clock that's probably 5 turns. Surge, really nice to have access to the extra surges and gaining that survival. Essentially, this is what I've been talking about through the whole thing, is the Crimson Crocodile puts you under time pressure. It's not going to let you drag the showdown out. At some point, it's going to tell you, no, you kill me or you're going to die. You're going to lose someone. I think this is a fantastic survivor status. I think it's super fair and really nicely well done. There's not much to say beyond spend those survivals, get surging, get dodging, get in there. And you probably generally don't even want to worry about removing Terrified unless you know the monster has the auto sort of like real major punishes in its AI deck and it's going to target you. One less positive thing I'd like to say is this. This is common across the Gambler's Chest. You get 4 copies of the status cards, you get 4 disarms, so on and so forth. And the Gambler's Chest is a mode that introduced a 5th character via the Scout. We also have rules for playing 5 and 6 players, so technically you could have up to 7 survivors in a showdown, but we only have 4 of these cards. It's even worse with Second Stomach, where you get 1 copy of it, and I kind of want multiple survivors with it, because that knowledge is great. I always feel a little let down that the game has skimped on things like this. Even electronically here, I don't have a 5th copy of this card, and there's really not any reason for me to not have that beyond them duplicating the physical copy. I just think it's kind of just a little cheap in a game that prides itself upon being boutique and excessive and, really that premium experience. Just little areas like this feel kind of detract from the entire thing. So I'll get off my soapbox now and we'll get back to it. And we'll talk about the coagulated hit locations. So, as mentioned a little bit earlier on, the coagulated hit location deck is set up at the start of the showdown. All of these cards are shuffled together and then the Enchanted Flesh card is placed on top and you will draw from the bottom of the deck. A little awkward to do in the simulator. We don't really have the functionality for it there yet, but in physical it works just fine. These are all of the coagulated hit locations. I've laid them out in order to show the spaces that they correspond to. So here's the head of the Crimson Crocodile, its left and right flank, left and right corners, its flanks and its rear. The way this works is you have to be attacking the highlighted space in blue in order to be able to successfully wound. If you're attacking from anywhere else, it's going to be an automatic failure. So usually you don't want to do that. Sometimes circumstances might require somebody to step in attack one of these places that is coagulated but without being in the right spot, just because you gotta power through it and deal with it. When you lay out the deck like this, it's actually very interesting, because if we start to look at these, we've got 1, 2 of these, we got 3 of these, we've got 4 of these on the right hand side, but 1 of these on the left, and then we have 1 on the back. So if we flip up, that means we always know if we're attacking this on the left, it's the sparkling belly. We always know it's going to be the sparkling belly. And we know if it's the back one, it's always going to be the sparkling tail base, which is huge because this critical wound, I'll dig into it a bit later, but this is a really good critical wound. That is because every armor set tends to have one piece of one resource that's really hard to get. It's just a 1 copy of in the deck, but you need it to complete the set. The Crimson Fin is that for the Crimson Crocodile, so this is actually fantastic. These two, we don't know which way around they're going to be. I've put them in the corners just for visual understanding, just to make it a little easier to see them clearly, but they can either be the Sparkling Tiny Ear or the Sparkling Blood Colony, and then we've got several here. So let's go through, I'm going to combine these and then we're going to go through them all in order. We'll start with these two. Sparkling Tiny Ear, as you can see, unless you attack the highlighted spot, your wound attempt is an automatic failure, and you see the rule book for extended rules. And the main thing to note about that is just you need to be able to draw line of sight and be within range of the particular space, so logically you have to be able to attack that space. Sparkling Tiny Ear is +3 strength to wound this location. On a wound, the monster slams its head into the ground and all adjacent survivors get whipped and suffer 1 hit for monster level damage. Important there, that says 1 hit. So anyone who's not the attacking survivor could dodge or block that. The attacking survivor can't because they're not allowed to use survival actions, but if they had a deflect token, that would trigger there. So that's something just to pay attention to. It's rare that a reaction uses the word hit, so it gives you an opportunity if it says that. On the crit, the monster's eyes bulge as it defecates from the pain. It suffers an additional wound, huge, 2 wounds, 1 hit, amazing. And then it becomes deaf, unable to hear everyone's heartbeat. The monster loses its confidence and it gains a -1 damage token. I really can't stress how strong that is. Reducing the monster's attacks from 2 damage to 1 damage, 1 being of course the minimum it can be at, is incredibly good. Okay, the Blood Colony. You get +6 because this is the monster's pride and joy. It suggests that the blood has like parasitic or hive kind of elements to it because it's described as a sparkling blood colony. It makes sense if they're semi-autonomous organisms that work as part of a whole with the Crimson Crocodile, making it a zooid, a bit like the Man of War, but maybe that's not what they mean by colony. Regardless, you get +6 strength to wound this location, incredible. If you crit, you gain a random monster resource, and we get that lost humour persistent injury, which your attack savages a carefully cultivated cluster of egg mushrooms. The sparkle fades from the monster's wild irises, and this affects some AI cards. So it's kind of like juggling about and dithering about a little bit just a few moments ago. It sort of suggests that this is a symbiotic kind of thing, and this is how the monster has some of its elements. It's interesting, but there's not enough detail to be able to really tease anything much more out of it, except that it is egg mushrooms. Okay, on the left hand side we just have Sparkling Belly, so +3 strength to wound the location. On a failure you get a basic action targeting you. On a critical wound, the belly blow ripples through the monster, producing a foul belch. You vomit on yourself to the sound of the monster's creaky laughter. A single tear falls from its largest eye, and you gain the Blood Diamond Tear strange resource. And this is that strange resource. It is a organ diamond and gives you phobophobia when you gain it. So that's something that can happen a fair bit. This is the start of your act. If you have 0 insanity, you gain the Terrified Survivor status card, phobophobia being the fear of fear. So let's do head. We have here the Sparkling Eyelid. no bonuses on this. In fact, if you look across the head, you'll see only one of them has a bonus. So if you're attacking the front pieces, you basically want to assume that you're not getting a strength bonus because it's only a 1 in 3. You may know exactly which one it is on later passes though. Okay, the Sparkling Eyelid on failure, full move the monster away from the attacker and turn to face them. The monster looks into you, its irises swirling in opposite directions. The blood from your limbs rushes to your brain and you suffer frenzy. If you critically wound, then a pressurized jet of oxygen-rich blood sprays into your mouth. You gain permanent +1 strength, suffer frenzy twice, and you gain the monster resource Eye of Immortal. We'll look at that when we go through the resources. It's, in my opinion, one of the most valuable resources you can get from the basic monster resource deck. And it's one that I'm happy to have in at least one copy of, sometimes duplicates. Sparkling Snout, this is the +3 strength one. Failure is a basic action targeting you. Not too bad, but if you are terrified, that's bad news. So maybe you want to think about it. Not be terrified if you can attack here. On a critical wound, the monster sneezes, drenching you in fluid that instantly clots your blood. You add 1 armor point to all hit locations for each bleeding token you have. Nice little bonus there. And then we have the Sparkling Tongue. On a failure, if adjacent to the monster, it turns to face you and skewers your eyeball with its tongue. You suffer the blind severe head injury. The monster then places it in an empty side socket, connecting you forever. You swap all of your attribute tokens with the monster, discarding any toughness tokens, converting damage to strength and vice versa. So this can be, it can be a disaster, it can be really good. It sort of depends what's going on, but suffering blind, that's not great. As always, Dried Acanthus is one of your best ways of handling this kind of stuff. On a critical, you sever the monster's tongue, you gain +1 survival and the Immortal Tongue monster resource. Note, cutting the tongue out doesn't persistent injury this, so it's going to regrow a tongue if it goes back to the deck again. Right. Literally, the right hand side pile of Coagulated are the most varied. We'll start with the Sparkling Upper Back. This is the one that gets put into on top of the deck by the 99 spine. You gain +3 strength to wound this location. A failure will be a basic action with +1 damage, so as noted before, be careful attacking your right. If you are terrified, you really shouldn't be doing it. Critical wound gives you a Founding Stone, starting gear, and +1 survival. This is nice. You can chuck a Founding Stone into this location knowing that you'll get refunded the Founding Stone and gain +1 survival and a wound. That's a really nice deal. Sparkling Heart has first strike. That means you have to resolve this first. It has a reflex. Chest fingers open seductively to reveal an 8-chambered heart. Its octuple beat transfixes you, gain immortal, perform basic action targeting the attacker. So again, and I think if we scroll across here, yeah, in all cases of attacking on the right, you've got to be ready for a basic action targeting you if you fail, so don't be terrified. On a critical wound, roll the dice. On a 1, you die and the monster heals 1. Rocks fall and everybody dies. On a 2 to 9, you gain a random monster resource, and if attacking with Fist and Tooth, you can ignore this and continue the deadly thumb war. Do love that bit of text, and roll on this table again. On a 10+, you crush the heart and the monster dies. Given that you can't get really any bonuses to this, you shouldn't continue the thumb war. Just take your resource and your wound and be happy with it. Then we got the Sparkling Crimson Gills. +3 strength to wound dislocation, basic action on failures before. The critical wound gives the Crimson Crocodile a -1 accuracy token, and you gain a random monster resource because you slide your attack right inside the gill and damage its breathing and blood filtering abilities. Finally, on the right hand side, we've got the Sparkling Claw, again +3 strength to wound dislocation, with the basic action punishment on a failure. Critical wound, strike the soft tissue between the monster's claws and gain a random monster resource. You roll 1d10. On a 4+, the strike cleaves the foot clean off. The monster can no longer shift its weight and it gains a -1 damage token. So it's always good, as mentioned before, get that -1 damage token. This becomes better, more powerful against the high level monsters because they have that extra base +1 and +2 damage, but still reducing 2s to 1 is always nice and dealing critical wounds is always nice. So that is the Coagulates. Let's flip them all down again. Final refresher, as always, there's only 1 here, there's 4 here, there's 1 here, there's 3 here, and there are 2 here. You can learn these. At the very minimum, you should know exactly which ones have gone into the hit location deck, and you should know what they are when they come up. to be brutally honest, if you know what the card is and it's coming, you really should refresh your memory on what it is, because it's not hidden information, this is derived information. The game has already told you it, and this isn't a memory game. Kingdom Death isn't about memorising everything. It's fine. I think it's absolutely fine. If the card is on top and you go, I know this one, we've seen it already, and it's the only one in the deck, I'm going to refresh my memory on it. That's okay. Regardless, I think the hit locations here are all super interesting. The monster is troublesome to attack without feeling unfair. You're definitely punished for making unwise moves like attacking hit locations that are coagulated. When terrified, you shouldn't be doing that. There's a blood pool, go drink from it and calm down, stop being scared. You know, just don't be scared, huh? Overall, I think this is really neat, and I think the coagulated hit locations in particular are amazing. I straight up wish that this was this sort of diagram was standard, that we had on the back. It told us whether it was the head or the leg or whatever, you know, it highlighted pieces of the backs rather than having these generic backs with the crest on them. But you can't change this without moving on to a new version of the game. I really hope to see Kingdom Death something else which updates the backs of the cards and doesn't just give us crests, gives us more information, takes these systems and refines them all further. But that's beside the point. We're talking about the Crimson Crocodile. Let's get on to the resources. We've got a lot here. Here are our two strange resources. I've just got this for reference, and here are normal resources and our Indomitables. I'm not going to go into any of the gear in a lot of detail. I'll be saving that for the And You video about the Crimson Crockery, which will follow this one sometime soonish. For now, let's just go through the resources. They're laid out in numbers, so highest to lowest. There are 4 lots of pale flesh, which is great, that's needed for the armor set, 3 crimson bones, 3 flat veins, and 3 veined glass. An important thing to note about veined glass is there's a prestige weapon in the Crimson Crockery, the Blood Scythe, and you need a ton of veined glass, 13, the magic number, in order to make this. And there's only 3 per Crimson Crocodile, so if we think about that, even if we got the maximum amount from each Crimson Crocodile every time, we'd need to kill at least 4 to reach that number anyway, and that's unlikely to happen. So it is very difficult to build Giggling Scythe, that's the name of it, and as such, if you want to make it, you may want to just hold on to veined glass. The cleaver uses it, it's a fine weapon. The Katar uses it, it's a fine weapon. The blood glass dagger is even pretty good for a dagger, but you may want to just be like, I'm going to save every single piece of veined glass to get this, and if you want to do that, you want to decide to do it early. We've got 2 sets of pale fingers, and then 1 bloodstool, 1 crimson fin, 1 eye of immortal, 1 immortal tongue, 1 tiny ear, 1 groomed nails, and 1 pseudopenis. You've seen some of these, like the eye, the fin, the tongue. They all have like some specific drop locations if you critically wound, and you can get a finger on the hunt event. The really good ones, if we go up here, let me zoom in a moment, there we are. You'll see crimson bone, we want 1 for the helm, 3 pale flesh, and a crimson fin. The armor set's amazing. I thoroughly recommend making it, so that gives you some numbers there. On these things down here, the pale finger darts are okay. Throw weapons still have the same problem, that no mastery makes them less desirable and less interesting. Bloodglass cleaver, Katar, and the saw I think are all really good. The crimson pearls here, bloodstool, I'll actually turn them into a set of crimson pearls, fantastic. Blood Compass Lantern, I think, is one of the single best items in the entire location. It requires the groomed nails, a skull, and a scrap. I've been making as many of those as I can. I think like 2 or 3 is absolutely optimal. Crocodile Eyes, really exciting, interesting thing. You can't use it if you're going to be using hit location revealing, but if you're not using scouting and you're instead using stuff like the Blood Compass Lantern for your hit location control and you're skipping AO control, this becomes incredibly powerful. Then we have the Crimson Bow, which needs that irregular optic nerve, which I don't have. Shall we make it appear? There it is. So, it has this little extra thing you can do in order to fix your optic nerve and solve being blind. It's got Silk Surgeon synergy. Silk Surgeons are very rare. There's a use for it, but really you should be spending it on the Crimson Bow. I think it's fantastic. And I already talked about the Giggling Scythe. So your basics there. The other thing to just briefly note is when we look at resources and we look for hide, we've got this nice bone hide here. This is a hide organ, so these are an organ ear. They're slightly higher quality because they've got multiple different types they can be. We've got bone organ as well. So this isn't as varied as the Gorm's options for resources, but they're pretty good. And the Crimson Crocodile has a fairly good mix. And if I remember correctly and have done it right, there is 11 hide in the deck, 10 bone and 11 organs, but some of those are multiples, so there's less cards than that in the overall number. Indomitable resources, so these come from defeating the level 3 Crimson Crocodile. I've ranked them roughly in order of how much I value them. Important to note, the Diamond Scabs are not in last place because I think that the Qatar is bad. It's not, it's because you can also get it from the hunt phase, so I'd rather have something else drop. The Secret Stone is, for me, the absolute undisputed winner. I think the Dome Buster is one of my favourite weapons. It's incredible, really fun. The Diffuser Heart is some days you'd see me put the Diffuser Heart ahead of the Secret Stone in what I want dropped, because the Immortal Arm is a phenomenal shield that can also be fist and tooth, and you can't be disarmed. It can give you deflect. It's got great strength. It's just really, really good. Then there's the Fear Spear, which I think is unique. It's not as unbelievably exciting as these two, because mostly it's just a spear with sharp, but that is good. This ability here though can be very, very useful against Crimson Crocodiles, because you can choose to gain no insanity, meaning you don't worry about that, or you can have +3 against other monsters, so it's always got some kind of use. The Vampire Fang becomes Blood Drinker. This one kind of runs almost a little counter to itself. I'll talk more about it in detail, but the fact that it gives you more strength for bleeding is nice, but also whenever you wound, you lose bleeding, so you lose strength. Now, there are ways of self-bleeding, Story of the Young Hero being the classic, because you can do that every single turn. So there are spaces where the Blood Drinker works well. And then the Diamond Scabs, this is the weapon I think you end up with most of all, because it has higher chances of dropping. It's great, okay? It's a lovely paired Qatar. It's got sharp, it's got clobber, which I really like. It's got perfect hit synergies. It's fantastic. But as I say, this isn't a deep dive into these. This is mostly to say I want these two to drop most of all. That's what makes me most happy, and I think I'm least happy about the end of Vampire Fang. Finally, we got the Staircase of Blood. I'm going to go through this in detail when I go through the outskirts with all the scout stuff together, but in the future I'll probably have to talk about scout discoveries separately somewhere. So, or do a catch up on them, because they're going to arrive here and there. Staircase of Blood, which you'll get when you defeat the level 3 Crimson Crocodile, and you have the scout. That's what I'm looking for. You have the scout in your party. You'll get to resolve this. It's the best part of it is, apart from a little bit interesting sort of lore, like these steps existing made out of blood spiral up into the sky. It seems there's a Crimson Crocodile lurking in the sky, which is kind of really interesting and fascinating. And Hostock the Gloaming, which is a very interesting weapon. If you can handle its demands and drawbacks, it is an absolute powerhouse. But if you don't manage to wound the monster, it's threatened to kill you outright unless you've got ways of withstanding gaining bleed and not dying from 5 bleed tokens. It's also got just a lovely expression. This is something I'll go into more with the Scout deep dive video when I get to that. I do think it is very interesting though that it seems like Crimson Crocodiles at higher levels make these clotted blood spiral staircases and lurk around up there. And yeah. So that's it. That's the Crimson Crocodile. That's all of the little different bits and pieces. To finally wrap things up, I think the Crimson Crocodile is one of the best parts of the Gambler's Chest. I think it's, as I said near the beginning of this video, It's one of my favourite boss monsters in any board game, and probably any boss game at all. I would love to see this in Monster Hunter, you know, and or something, you know, Monster Hunter style game or something. It is a delight. It's never easy. It is unpredictable. It's got a sense of humour. It's weird. It's wacky. It's very dangerous, and I think it's just fantastic. The main things to kind of bear in mind: these terrain locations I should briefly cover before we wrap this up entirely, and they are the blood pool, which you drink from and get +1 to your result if you stand in the very middle space. You can gain insanity here, so this is one of your repeatable sources of gaining insanity. Immortal is really useful, but not against the Crimson Crocodile. We also have our Survivor Corpse here, which is a 1 use. It'll give you some insanity. You don't want to move through this space though. You can stand on it, but not, you know, deploy on it to start with, but don't move through it. That'll give you some insanity for a 1 shot with some resources. This is a very rewarding showdown in general. This is my usual initial setup, because then the Crimson Crocodile will come in here, attack here, and then I can get survivors into the back like so, and one survivor can get to the pool for a drink. Something like this is my preference. Normally the Crimson Crocodile is going to go, the left and right rolls I want to avoid. So that is definitely it now. This is, I think, one of the best monsters in the game. I love crocodiles. I've loved this thing ever since I first saw the sculpts, the renders for it, and I'm really happy that it's turned out to be as good as I hoped. It is, as I say, it's a shining blood diamond in the crown of the gambler's chest, and I think one of the biggest arguments towards getting that, along with the Ark survivors. So that's it. That's the end of this. You can put down your pens and pencils, and hopefully, you know, when you're out there in the darkness and you hear the snap, the saline snap of a Crimson Crocodile in the vicinity, you're not stupid like Brave and tell him where everyone is, and instead you're able to take it on and beat it down armed with this knowledge. And that's it. I'd like to take a moment to thank my patrons for supporting these videos, and just to reiterate, as I said at the start, this is the first edited video. I don't know how many more videos I'm going to be able to edit. That depends on you guys. You can go to the link in description and join one of those Patreon tiers if you want to help build up enough for me to be able to afford to get these edited, because I'd like to have all the Dark Bestiaries edited, all of the and yous edited, and I'd like to start a series on all the philosophies and everything and get them edited as well. But, you know, that's very much in your court, and if you can't, that's fine. You know, thank you for watching. Likes and comments and all of that kind of stuff, and subscribe. And until next time, happy hunting.